To start with, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me. I feel really privileged to be here for the last few days. I will try to give you the story of the documentary, the dissemination process, and the impact that we could see about the documentary. And by this, I would like to give you an idea about the current Kurdish problem, or to put it rightly, the Turkish problem, because you can be sure that being a Turk is problematic, and the impact of the film. For those who had watched the film, I apologize because I want to give a brief just notice about what the film is about. So the starting point of the film is this photograph. It's a photograph taken in 1989 in one of the Kurdish villages, which has a border to Iran and Iraq and Turkey. It's a primary school picture, photograph with the children with their teacher. What we did was started with this photograph, and 20 years later went back and tried to find those students. Fortunately, they were coming together for a wedding of one of their classmates in the village. Not all of them, but we were able to have 11 of the children in the photograph. As mentioned before, Buka Barani literally means the bride of the rain. The Kurds call the rainbow the bride of the rain. So that's the name given to the film. Today, although currently the Turkish government is at the brink of a peace process with the armed Kurdish guerrilla movement, PKK, and there is an ongoing ceasefire nowadays. The film was shot in 2012 while the war was still going on. And while we were shooting, it erupted in the region, the clashes started, so we wanted to have a wider perspective, at least geographically in the area, but we couldn't get out of the village because of the clashes around. 23 years, as I've mentioned before, after the photograph is taken, one of the students is going back to his village for the wedding of his classmate. Their story begins with the childhood years, the village, and the school days. The primary school, which symbolizes the first encounter with the state for them, because none of the students who went to the primary school were talking in Turkish. The only language they used was Kurdish. They knew and used was Kurdish, and they were forbidden to speak in Kurdish in the school. Not only that, their names, their Kurdish names, were changed into Turkish names overnight by the Turkish school teacher, in good faith, most probably, that they won't live much trouble with the original Kurdish names. So it was traumatizing for them to be educated in a language that they did not speak at first, then to be called with a different name, different than from their own name. That's what school meant for them. Through the story of those classmates, it takes us to the 90s, when the village guard system by the state was first established, and most of the region was under a state of emergency. The village is frequently visited by soldiers and the PKK guerrillas. At night, usually, the guerrillas come to the village, sometimes to ask for shelter and food. And during the day and in early morning, the armed forces of the Turkish army go to the village. to seek out whether there are any PKK guerrillas in the village, whether they helped the guerrillas, interrogating people and collecting them all in the area and beating them. And then we listened to the high school and university years of the classmates. One very important aspect for me in the film is one of them who went to the capital, Ankara, to university, says it was traumatizing for him because in Ankara, everyone, the students, his classmates, his landlord, in the shops, in the streets, were talking in a non-accented Turkish, which reminded him of the Turkish of the policemen and the soldiers who came to this village. So he always thought that he was surrounded by those policemen when he went to Ankara for his education. The documentary ends with the wedding where the classmates are dancing together. They all hope for another wedding, which can take place in times of peace. The documentary intends to tell the story of children who grew up during the 90s and who could be at any primary school in Kurdistan. The story of the children who think that a peaceful life without war is almost as unimaginable as jumping over the rainbow. Hafıza Merkezi, my organization, made around 80 screenings of the film all over Turkey, and with sometimes intriguing and sometimes contentious reactions. I would just like to give you briefly what 19s in Turkey in the area of the Kurdish region in the area of Kurdistan meant. As most of you know, Turkey and its historic and legal predecessors have a long-standing track record of human rights violations. Being a country with an imperial history, these violations are especially widespread. Numbers of victims are virtually countless, and the time frame is vast. Just in the last 100 years, widespread violations were committed in several different periods and were mostly targeting specific religious or ethnic and sometimes political groups. The most notable ones were the Armenian genocide of 1915, the coup d'etats in 1960, 71, and 80, and the persecution of Kurds from 90s onwards. The institutional and social indifference towards the crime and its perpetrator deepens the wounds of the victims and the practices of reckoning with understanding and redeeming the past, as well as prosecution and retribution mechanisms remaining inactive. This was also the case with the Kurdish situation from 1984 on, when the Kurdistan Workers' Party introduced military actions as one of the ways of struggle for the fulfillment of its political goals. The conflict between Turkey and the PKK armed forces has continued until the Newroz celebrations of March 2013, where in March 2013 the imprisoned PKK leader Abdullah Öcalan declared a ceasefire. This was the 9th one-sided ceasefire declared by the PKK forces, and he said that now we are in a new era and we should start peace negotiations. Today, the negotiations are on a bumpy road, unfortunately, because of so many reasons, but just let me indicate one, that because of the ISIS and Iraq and Syria, the Kurdish problem is not only the problem of geographically of Turkey anymore, it's a regional problem, and it will need most probably international tools to deal with the peace process. Although there is a ceasefire going on, there is no retribution process, but unfortunately the 90s remain in the memory of Kurds as a burning issue. And to tell you what happened in the 90s in one short sentence was because of the policies of the Turkish state during the 90s, of especially Prime Minister Tansu Çiller. They had a new strategy in the war against the PKK. They wanted to cut the civilian support to the PKK, and a new strategy was introduced. And it was called the territorial dominance and the expulsion of the PKK from the region. That meant to get the territorial supremacy, the result was a visible increase in the forced evacuation of Kurdish villages. Around 3,500,000 people were evacuated, had to leave their homeland. There were a tremendous increase in summary murders. We don't have the exact figures, unfortunately, but it's related to be around 10,000. And a great increase in enforced disappearances of civilians. We believe that during the 90s, around 1,500 and 2,000 Kurdish civilians were forcibly disappeared. So the 19s meant this, especially for the Kurds. Unfortunately, there is a shield of impunity for the perpetrators still going on. Not only that they are not trialed or persecuted, usually they are promoted and they keep their positions in the military, in the bureaucracy, and that's still going on. And we're going through a peace process with this atmosphere. If I can elaborate on the state's position today, it's incomparable to the 90s, of course, but in general, the state as well as the Turkish society, I can say, is undergoing a period in which the hegemony of official historiography, as well as the policies of absolute denial, are continuously being undermined by several actors and factors today. The political actors who are raising their voices against the official history are, to name a few, the PKK, the Kurdish movement, Alawite groups, Armenian intellectuals, starting with Murat, who was unfortunately assassinated, intellectuals, activists, and human rights defenders, leftist intellectuals, I can say, and Islamists. The action of the political actors have resulted in a desire of masses to learn the truth, pursue justice, and adhere to their conscientious obligations. However, this process faces many obstacles. Doubt, fears, and defensive reflexes remain very strong, especially with the state. The state still seems to pursue its denial policies, only partially breaking away with them when politically opportune. It's feared that the acknowledgement of past crimes will erode the sovereignty of the state. So this is still the state's official position, and during the peace process, as we have seen everywhere in the world, there is no tendency to deal with the past, but the general tendency of the state and the governing party is, let's forget about the past and look to the future. And of course, you know, it's never easy to forget about the past, and people who were victims and people who are perpetrators are not on equal level to forget or to remember the past. Let me just tell you something about the society giving out figures about the support of this so-called peace process, because the official name is not a peace process but a solution process. That's the reason for that is that the state still does not acknowledge that there was a war, so they say that there can't be a peace if we didn't have a war, so it's a solution. It's called a solution process officially. For a recent survey by the Open Society Foundation and the Bosphorus University called Identity in Turkey, Kurdish Question and Reconciliation Process, Perceptions and Positions, which was done in 2014, a sample of 2,300 representing the population in Turkey at the age of 18 and above were interviewed. The groups offering the biggest support to the reconciliation process, which is backed at a rate of 57% in general, are, in order of the extent of their support, the voters of BDP, the Kurdish party, meaning the Kurds, voters of AKP, the governing party, who are highly conservative, devout religious persons, and those standing at the farthest right of the political spectrum. So these are the groups in general who support the peace process in Turkey. The biggest opponents of the reconciliation process are the voters of the ultra-nationalistic party and the main opposition party, the Social Democrats. The Social Democrats unfortunately represent the Kemalist ideology of the state in Turkey, so they think that a peace process with the Kurds is about the sovereignty of the state, and it's against the Kemalist version of that everyone is equal and everyone is Turkish, and so they don't support the process, although they say in their declarations that they support, but we don't know how. The unfortunate event is, as mentioned yesterday, there is a reality of over-politicization of everything in Turkey and in the region. So something as a peace process, which should be above all daily politics, is not viewed like that, but people deal with the peace process according to their political stand. Whether they are voting for the Social Democrats or whether they are voting for the governing party, as you can see from the survey, only the people supporting the Kurdish party and the governing party are for the peace process, which is only 57% of the population. And unfortunately, when the survey asks questions about the results, whether they believe that there will be a solution, this percentage goes down. Those expecting a successful outcome from the reconciliation process represents 47% of the society. Most of the Kurds, although they support the process tremendously, do not believe that there will be a just and democratic solution for them with this peace process. I would like to mention one other factor, the role of the media in this process and in the atrocities of the 90s against especially the Kurdish or people in the opposition in general. The media have started the Kurdish issue and reconciliation process more widely nowadays. But they have not changed their attitude about the past crimes of the 90s, of the 80s, of the coup d'etat period. The mainstream media have still some sort of self-censorship about state crimes. unfortunately, it's very hard to say that the media is now converted from a war media to a peace media. They did not, because the same actors are still the main actors in the big media, and they have been the actors of the war, who were in support of an end to terrorism of Kurds for years, and now they are debating about peace with Kurds. The media, unfortunately, there is no, as I mentioned, no change in the actors, as they don't employ anyone who has the knowledge of Kurdish now, who has the knowledge of region, any experts about peace processes, transitional justice processes. You can see not many people who are experts in these areas in the debates on the televisions. So it's still going on with the old actors of the media. And let me tell you, the media has played a tremendously awful role in the war during the 90s, and it's still valid today. And of course, there is a proliferation of Kurdish documentaries in Turkey now, but how do they reach out? Does any of the mainstream televisions, the public televisions, and numerous private televisions, are they screening them? No, they are not. So a censorship is still going on about the Kurdish issue. So what we did with our documentary, because we didn't have a chance to screen it to wide audiences via television especially, we didn't have a chance to distribute it in the regular channels that feature films are being distributed and screened in movie houses. What we did was we had a gala opening of several intellectuals, embassy representatives, political representatives of around 1,700 people at first. And that made it possible for the mainstream media to cover the news about the documentary. Then we applied to some national and international festivals, first in Turkey, because that would be legitimizing the documentary. Fortunately, they accepted it, and we were able to show the film around 20 film festivals in Turkey, and then internationally to outside Turkey. What we did was, we have a youth program in which we work with university students, and we ask them to organize their clubs at the universities and ask for the screening of the film without any charges. And we sent the film to whomever or organization who said that we want to screen it, and we send it out. So to conclude, what was the impact of the film? Of course, we don't have any survey about it, but I want to, this is a documentary, they're telling their life stories, so there is hardly any manipulation in the film, but it was not accepted as unbiased in some communities, depending on their political stance. We were criticized by instrumentalizing the past for the present, criticized for being biased, criticized for showing the role of the army in a biased way. And that comes, I mean, I would like to come to the conclusion that people working in especially the human rights area are one of their priorities is finding out the truth and the right truth, as you know. And we believe that when we find the truth and make documentations and documentaries it will have an impact. Unfortunately, it does not have a direct impact. As I mentioned before, people accept the truth according to their political standing and stance, usually, and they believe that you are not unbiased in your servings. But going back to the discussions of yesterday, of course, there is no absolute truth in positivism, but on the other hand, there is the danger of the negotiable truth, which represents a relativism in a way that you put the perpetrators and the victims on the same level, as was done maybe in the opening film of The Act of Killing. It is a very strong film, but unfortunately I personally believe that it legitimizes the perpetrator in the film, giving them the voice and the acting stance. So it's a critical issue. I would just like to refer and quote Mr. Mahmoud Mamdani in this matter, in the matter of truth and the created memory or the memory process. He says that there are two kinds of truth, one which starts a public debate, and the other for the sake of conserving the social balance, which silences, obstructs the public debate. Of course, we believe that the truth can really set us free, at least by narrowing the range of permissible lies.